I'm going to spend some time today kind of talking through some of the resources that I end up looking at when thinking about drought and trying to get some information there. And hopefully, if you have an interest in kind of following this yourself or getting some more, on the ground local estimates and forecasts, one of these resources will be helpful to you. So again, I usually start off my presentations here thinking about this US Drought Monitor. But for this presentation in particular, I wanted to draw your attention to this specific website. I know that, there are a lot of places where that you can kind of see that domestic map of the Drought Monitor. And, I think it's helpful to kind of see the extent of drought throughout the country at any given time. But this website in particular, I like if I'm trying to get some local on the ground information, because you can key in on specific counties, and I'll show you in a minute on specific zip codes here. And so for here, I can select Cache County in particular, or the zip for Logan, right? And so, I can see what drought category we're in, as well as look at some precipitation and temperature information there, as well as looking at some forward-looking, information on drought. On the right, you can see, the monthly as well as the seasonal outlook for all of Utah is that drought is going to persist. Okay, thanks, Kinda. If you're looking for information on the US Drought Monitor and you don't have a favorite website to go to, I would suggest this as a good place to start. If then I am thinking about, just kind of giving a general overview of where we're at in the state for our drought. Obviously, we have not had a lot of changes, right? I think that that's been reflected in news reporting, as well as, kind of just looking outside what we have in terms of current conditions. But something that I'm thinking about here as we kind of start moving into the summer months as our snowpack melts, I really expect to see, some of the intensity of the drought increasing. I know we've kind of have, as you can see, a little bit of a reprieve here up in the northern part of the state. But again, as all indications so far are suggesting, I really don't expect to see this map changing too much as we go through the summer months here and into the growing season. I have kind of pulled this figure back out recently because I think, when I was making these presentations and thinking about drought back in the fall, I was really pointing to some of the drought that we've experienced in the early 2000s. And unfortunately, if you look to kind of see where we're at today, the drought that we're experiencing is really so incredibly severe and intense that we really haven't experienced before, as well as the extent across the state, and as well as the duration, right? And so I think kind of keeping all of those factors in mind when we start thinking about what our water supply is going to be and what some of the impacts are going to be on the ground, right? That's something that we should really keep in mind. The second kind of set of resources that I want to draw your attention to are these forecasts from NOAA. And I think NOAA is a really good place to start looking at some of these maps and getting these forecasts. I pulled this website with all of the forecasts so you can kind of choose which one you might be most interested in. I have kind of been defaulting to pulling just the 1 month outlooks. And I think for me, I think that I also show a seasonal outlook. We have kind of an outlook for, kind of drought, but unfortunately those haven't really been changing too much, those longer term projections or forecasts. But, when we're starting to kind of look at the rest of the month of May, right, we have increased probability of above average temperatures and below average precipitation. One kind of good news or thing that I'd like to kind of remind us all, right, is throughout this winter, we were in that La Nina, which historically for Utah has been associated with those drier conditions, especially across the southern part of the state. And so as we kind of head back into this ENSO neutral, again, we have, as you can see on the screen there, we have about an 80% chance of entering ENSO neutral in the early part of the summer, late spring here. So hopefully as we move back into this ENSO neutral phase, we may see kind of a letting up of some of those drier conditions that we, again, usually associate with La Nina. I'm not going to say that this is going to alleviate our drought issues, but perhaps we might see kind of a letting up, or at least this won't be an additional driver that we have to think about. The third resource that I want to draw your attention to is kind of this this climate and weather information from the USDA. I really like their products here. I didn't put a box around it, but their weekly weather and crop bulletin I find useful. It's at a domestic level, but we kind of get some tracking of drought, of these weather conditions in a really succinct way. And I think they also have some really nice graphics. So if you are looking for another email to come into your inbox on a weekly basis to kind of track some of this weather information, I would suggest that one. But what I'm going to spend a minute kind of talking through a little bit more here too, is this U.S. Agriculture Drought Monitor. And I think I keep on pulling this up. And I think if you've seen a presentation, you've seen these figures before. But what this, Ag and Drought report does is it maps a few different commodities acreage onto the map, and then it also pulls in this U.S. Drought Monitor data. And so we can see the drought areas, kind of highlighted in red there. And then what I'm looking at least initially here, is major hay areas and minor hay areas in the green. And so, I'd like to think that we can start using this bit of information in combination, with some of the data and some of the price information that Ryan, as well as Dylan have been showing. So for me, I can see, approximately 32% of the acreage, the hay acreage in the US is experiencing drought right now, right? And then I can also start seeing how that's kind of changed over time, right? If we think that, we may have declining conditions, which may be increasing prices, I may want to start watching what's going on in the, kind of in the West, as well as what's going on in the domestic markets there. So, for the hay markets, we can see that, the acreage in moderate or more intense drought, right, just kind of low-level drought has been relatively consistent. And so for me, I was kind of watching this go up in the fall, but we've kind of leveled out here and even declined in the last couple of weeks. And so that's good news for me. However, if we start thinking about the alfalfa hay acreage in particular, that's where I might see some cause for concern, or something that I might kind of be watching here as we, again, move into the growing season and start thinking about how drought may change over the summer months. And so if I look at the alfalfa acreage in particular, we can see that a little bit different story here. Approximately 54% of the acreage is experiencing drought, right? So a little bit more. And again, that's just because of the acreage shifting, kind of northwest there and entering, we have drought very broadly across the West. And so that's kind of explaining that effect. But what's really, I've kind of been watching for this alfalfa acreage, again, is this figure, and seeing how we've kind of seen a slowly steady increase of that acreage in at least experiencing some drought. And that's kind of happened since late spring here. And so I'm kind of keeping an eye on this in particular, again, as we move into the growing season, as we start thinking about how the drought conditions on the ground are really going to play out this summer. The last one I'll leave you with here, and again, they have a bunch of different commodities if you want to kind of keep a look at, but also cattle. I kind of tend to watch this cattle map here too. And I think the good news for the cattle acreage is that we've kind of seen declining percent of the acreage experiencing drought. And so for me, hopefully that, that's a bit of a good news. But again, if those range and pasture conditions continue to decline, if we have, the hay acreage experiencing some stress, again, across the West, especially that alfalfa acreage, that's going to be a concern and something that I would expect to see start being reflected in those prices, which again, Ryan is doing a really good job covering and kind of keeping you all informed of. The next kind of set of reports that I find particularly useful are going to be Utah specific. And so this would be the Climate and Water Report, as well as the Water Supply Outlook Report. The Water Supply Outlook Report reports on snowpack, stream flows, and this is we're kind of phasing out this report, and I'm going to start using the Climate and Water Report a little bit more. because the climate and water report includes monitoring both in the valleys as well as the mountainous conditions. And so I think it has a really nice snapshot of conditions that agricultural producers, as well as, kind of those in our urban areas are going to be experiencing. And so this climate and water report, again, it kind of has dual monitoring that it kind of brings together. And so what we can see from this report is it's a little bit more technical, but if you're looking for soil moisture, precipitation, temperature, water availability, that sort of information in a graphical framework, broken up kind of across the state. It doesn't get to the county level, but you can, again, kind of key in a little bit more on conditions in your part of the state. I find it super helpful. And so again, I'm kind of keying in on the precipitation data that we're pulling here. And so we can see for this water year, again, no surprise, this is something we've kind of talked about over and over again, but really we're close to the minimum levels of precipitation that we've seen statewide in terms of the historical data there. The water supply outlook report is what I was, again, drawing on during the winter months when we did have that snowpack and we did want to start monitoring those mountainous conditions for snowpack and snow water equivalents. And so this report was super useful for, kind of showing future estimates of stream flows and runoff. And again, just like the other report, it gives statewide estimates as well as basin level or kind of, more local estimates for folks because, right, it's really helpful to be able to say, in this region in particular, we really haven't seen that rainfall, right? Or our snowpack is good, or at least getting better. And I don't think I would have ever said our snowpack was good this year, but, just so we can have some of those regional differences across the state, which may be more applicable. And so, I also think that this is a very useful report. Again, the story that we've kind of kept on reiterating here, soil moisture is super dry across the state. Our snowpack levels we're pretty low. Our reservoir storage is super low. Our runoff, we're kind of experiencing runoff. And so we're seeing some water move from the headwaters, kind of downstream there. But in general, that's just not we are just not seeing that water entering the streams. And again, that's coming from, just super dry conditions, as well as some of that soil temperature levels being a bit higher. And so, again, I've been saying this as we move into the spring, or excuse me, the summer months and out of the spring here, the forecast is not looking super good for water availability, right? And I would say that that's not any new news, but if you're kind of looking to key into that a little bit more, I would suggest emailing Jordan or going to the NRCS page and pulling down these reports, particularly for Utah, and getting on this list. Or you have the option of also kind of following some of the products that we're putting out through USU. And so I'd like to draw your attention to this USU Drought Page that recently launched. Unfortunately, under the Drought Economic Resources, we are still working to kind of build some of that content. But again, I'm kind of thinking about what to make available through this resource. And I know some other folks are starting to populate this page. So I would definitely start thinking about bookmarking this. And then the last resource that I want to kind of put on your radar here is this Precip and prices report. If, I know there's a ton of different ways to get this information. Your inbox may be already full. You do not want to sign up for a new report. You don't want to have to muddle through any interpretations. But this Precip and prices report that Ryan and I put out, it's a monthly report for our Utah producers. We do a nice, I think we do a nice combination of doing current as well as future weather conditions, and then combining it with a short market outlook from Ryan. And so we really, he and I really try to integrate the information that we're conveying to try to help folks make some decisions there. There's a short video, less than 10 minutes, and a 2-page write-up that comes out every month. So if you're interested, please, go to our website, look at our social media pages and or email us to subscribe, because this is probably the most concise way for you to get this information. This is a list of the resources that I mentioned, and I think Kinda has been putting them in the chat for us as we go along here. But hopefully I can, again, make this presentation available to you if you want to follow up with any of these resources.